No, it was just the way things happened, It started off I didn't write, they wrote, then I started to write.
Don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot to me and costs you nothing. Most people picture George Harrison as the quiet Beatle, gentle, spiritual, the last person anyone believed could hold a serious grudge. But behind that calm face sat a storm he carried his entire life, a weight placed on him by one of the very bandmates he trusted most. He stood next to Lennon, McCartney, and Starr while they crafted classics like Yesterday, Let It Be, and Hey Jude. Yet, one of those same partners pushed him so low he never forgot it, not even at the very end of his life. And when George finally spoke up at 58, the world realized we never truly knew him the way we thought we did. Before we reveal who Harrison resented so deeply, we need to roll all the way back to the beginning, because this betrayal didn't come from nowhere. It came from wounds that started long before fame, money, and screaming crowds. Long before the world knew him as the quiet Beatle, George was just a young kid living in a cramped little two-up, two-down at 12 Arnold Grove. Born on February 25, 1943. He grew up in a house so cold you could literally see your breath indoors during winter. The toilet sat outside in the yard, the walls rattled with drafts, and the place looked more tired than anyone living in it. But that tiny house shaped him in ways nobody expected. Inside lived his mother, Louise Harisson, whose singing was so loud the neighbors joked the windows vibrated. During her pregnancy, she had a strange little ritual. Every Sunday, she tuned in to Radio India, letting sitars and tablas wash through the room like a calm wave. She believed the sounds would soothe her restless baby. George later admitted those rhythms never left him. They settled deep in his bones like fate, whispering his name long before he'd ever lay hands on a guitar. School felt like a trap to him. No guitars, no rhythm, no outlet for a kid with melodies constantly humming in the back of his mind. He'd sketch guitars in the margins of his notebooks, dreaming about escape routes no one else could see. Then in 1956, everything changed. Riding his bike home one evening, he heard Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel blasting through an open window. He slammed on the brakes. That moment, he said later, felt like an explosion in a neighborhood where nothing ever happened. Elvis wasn't just music, he was a doorway. From that day, George became obsessed. He begged for a guitar, practiced until his fingers burned, and slowly carved a place for himself in Liverpool's scrappy little music scene. But here's what people forget. As talented as he was, he always felt like the odd one out. John and Paul were older, tighter, already bonded by years of writing together. George was the kid brother, the tag-along, the one they let in, but never fully let equal, and that imbalance would grow roots. By the time Beatlemania hit, fans saw four young men smiling together on stages worldwide. But behind the scenes, George was fighting for space. Space to grow, space to write, space to be heard. Every time one of his songs was brushed aside, every time he was told to wait, another brick was added to the resentment he carried. It simmered quietly for decades, until finally, near the end of his life, George let the world know exactly who had hurt him most and why the wound had never healed. At 14, he begged his mother for a guitar, and she scraped together £3 and 10, practically a treasure for them. George played until his fingers hurt, following Lonnie Donegan's skiffle vibes and forming his first band, the Rebels. It was messy, loud, chaotic, and it felt like freedom. Then destiny stepped in again. On the school bus, George met a kid who would change everything, Paul McCartney. Two kids, same bus route, same hunger for guitars and escape. Paul would later call George his baby brother, but back then they were just two teens leaning over the seats, trading chords, breaking down riffs, and dreaming about stages they couldn't even picture yet. In March 1958, Paul brought George to audition for John Lennon's band, The Quarrymen. John thought George looked too young and joked, "He looks 12." But everything changed when George ripped through the lead to Raunchy, right there on a bus in the dark, lit only by a street lamp outside. Lennon didn't say a word afterward. His silence was the approval George needed. Suddenly, it was three Liverpool boys with cheap guitars and wild dreams, unaware that ego, jealousy, and heartbreak would one day turn their brotherhood into a battlefield. And the deepest cut came from John Lennon, the very person George once idolized. When the Beatles hit their global peak, that's when George's bond with John quietly started breaking apart. To the world, they looked like four brothers, but inside Studio 2 at Abbey Road, George felt like the outsider while John became sharper, colder, and harder for him to reach. The idol he once admired turned into the one who cut him the deepest. The cracks showed in the mid-1960s when George finally started writing songs he believed in. He brought "If I Needed Someone" into the studio full of pride, but John barely glanced at it and muttered, "It's nothing." That wasn't criticism. It was rejection. George went home in silence and told Pattie Boyd only one thing. John didn't even hear the song. Each time George tried to grow, John acted like it bothered him, especially when Harisson dove into meditation and Indian philosophy. John mocked him right in front of everyone. "You and your gurus, it's just another trap." Ringo later said the look on George's face was like someone had stabbed him in the open. The real breaking point came during the Let It Be sessions. In the raw 2021 Get Back footage, George tries calmly to explain a guitar idea while John ignores him completely. Eyes blank, acting like George wasn't even there. After a painful pause, George finally snapped, "I'll play whatever you want, or I won't play at all." When the Beatles split, that buried anger didn't fade. It exploded. And in 1973, during Lennon's chaotic Lost Weekend, the tension between them finally came face to face in a New York hotel. Everyone expected a warm, easy reunion, but instead, the room went ice cold in seconds. When John casually suggested they might play Madison Square Garden together, George snapped so fast nobody even breathed. He stood up, face burning, and shouted, "Where were you when I needed you?" Then he suddenly reached out, snatched John's glasses right off his face, and hurled them to the floor. May Pang later wrote that John froze completely, like every bone in him locked up. It was one of the only moments in his life where John Lennon was truly scared of George Harrison, the quiet man finally letting out 10 years of swallowed pain. But while that clash with John was explosive, the person George carried the deepest resentment for was Paul McCartney, right up to his final days. Fans always talk about Lennon and Harrison, but the real emotional cut came from Paul. Their conflict wasn't loud. It was slow, cold, and filled with invisible bruises. It began creeping in during the late 60s when Paul started tightening his grip on the band's sound. George would bring in songs he'd crafted for months, and Paul would just rearrange the whole thing on the spot like it was nothing. Engineer Jeff Emmerich remembered sessions where Paul literally stood over George's shoulder, telling him exactly how to play guitar parts Paul had written himself. He micromanaged George into the floor, Emmerich said. It was suffocating. George later admitted a truth he only said once in 1974. "Paul ruined me as a guitarist. Not ruined technically, ruined emotionally." That hit like a confession he'd held in his chest for years. One of the worst moments came during Maxwell's Silver Hammer. George hated the song, everyone did, yet Paul forced them through take after take after take. After days of this, George muttered to Ringo, "Why are we doing this?" Paul overheard and snapped, "Because it's my song." That cold tone stuck to George's memory like glue. But the real fracture hit in January 1969, day 2 of Let It Be. George finally told Paul he didn't like being bossed around on guitar. Paul answered, "I'm trying to help you, George." And George fired back the line Beatles historians still call the most honest sentence in the whole film. "You don't listen to anyone else." That wasn't just frustration. That was a decade of feeling invisible next to Lennon-McCartney. And even decades later, that sting never fully disappeared. In 1987, someone asked George if he'd ever join a band with Paul again, and he didn't even blink before answering. "I'd join a band with John, but not with Paul. It's nothing personal, just musical." Everyone knew those words were carrying something heavier than just musical. They were carrying years of bruised feelings that never fully healed. Even close to the end of his life, George held a wound Paul never quite understood, a wound shaped by a friendship that always felt uneven, no matter how much history they shared. George's final chapter began long before the public realized anything was wrong. By the late 90s, he had already fought through throat cancer, then lung cancer, and finally a brain tumor that drained his strength but never drained his creative soul. Even while undergoing radiation treatments, he kept pushing forward on the songs that became brainwashed. Donnie remembered walking in and seeing his father whispering melodies into a recorder because his voice didn't have the strength to rise, yet George refused to stop making music. That quiet urgency said everything. He knew the clock was moving faster than he wanted to admit. As the weeks passed, the pain sharpened, and the look on the doctors' faces said the truth without any words. George chose to move to Los Angeles, to a private home owned by Gavin DeBecker, where he could spend his final days surrounded by calm instead of hospital noise. Olivia and Donnie stayed by his side, setting the room with soft light, flowers, and devotional chanting, sounds that had followed him since 1966 and still settled his spirit. As November 2001 moved toward its final days, speaking became harder, and friends came quietly, one at a time. Ravi Shankar sent messages full of love, Tom Petty cried while holding the phone, and even Paul McCartney came to say goodbye. The meeting was emotional, awkward, painful, and strangely tender all at once. Time was slipping fast, and everyone felt it. On November 29, 2001, with Olivia and Donnie beside him, George drifted into a gentler state. His breathing slowed, his eyes softened, and his family recited prayers from the Bhagavad Gita, the same ancient verses he had lived by for decades. A final whisper left his lips, meant only for the people closest to him, and then he let go with a kind of peace he had searched for his entire life.
But what happened next stunned even the most seasoned industry insiders. His ashes were quietly taken to India. No paparazzi, no broadcast, no circus, and released into the sacred waters of the Ganges and Yamuna during a private, beautifully arranged ceremony. No cameras, no spectacle, just devotion, incense, flowers, and the sound of flowing water. It was exactly the farewell George always wanted. Spiritual, simple, and rooted in the beliefs that carried him through every triumph, every heartbreak, every shift in the universe around him. And as the years pass, something remarkable has happened. George Harrison's legacy doesn't fade. It expands. It moves. It grows. It's as if every year that goes by adds another layer to the man people once underestimated. Somewhere along the way, the so-called quiet Beatle transformed into a giant whose shadow still stretches across the world of music. Here Comes the Sun, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, All Things Must Pass, the concert for Bangladesh, his 2 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductions. All of it took George from the soft-spoken one in the back to one of the most respected, groundbreaking artists of the entire 20th century. Even today, musicians from every genre, rock, pop, indie, folk, speak his name with the same tone his son Donnie uses, real respect. Because George wasn't just talented, he was brave. He followed his own path, even when it cost him friendships, comfort, or pieces of himself he never got back. He walked away from the biggest band in the world when he felt unheard. He built his own sound when people doubted him, and he poured his soul into projects that didn't just entertain, they changed culture. George Harrison walked through life with a quiet strength and a quiet pain, carrying more weight in his heart than the world ever realized. And now you finally know the story he never spoke out loud. The side of him hidden behind the calm voice and the shy, almost bashful smile. So now it's your turn to think about it. If you were in his place, if someone you trusted had cut you that deeply, could you have forgiven them? Could you have released that hurt and walked forward with peace? Or would that pain have sat in your chest for years, growing heavier with every unspoken word? Drop your thoughts below. I want to hear what you think. And don't forget to like the video, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notifications for more stories the history books never had the nerve to tell. Secrets like these stay buried until we dig them up right here on Secret America.